My name is Robert Gaines. I'm 60 years old, and for the last 23 years I've given my blood, sweat, and weekends to a company called Bexley Rowe. I was there when the company barely had a nameplate on its office door. I was there when we got our first Fortune 500 client. I was there through 2 recessions, 3 CEOs, and more all-nighters than I care to count. I wasn't just some manager. I was the guy people came to for answers when things got messy. I was like the company's old oak tree. Not flashy, not fast, but solid and dependable. I was the head of client strategy, and I treated that title with the kind of pride and discipline that came from a different era. Younger folks in the office called me Old Man Gaines, half affectionate, half joking. I didn't mind. I was too busy mentoring half of them, helping them polish presentations, reviewing pitch decks late into the night, or coaching them through client crises. Then came Alan. Alan was our new CEO. Slick, always smiling, barely out of his 30s, and with the kind of attitude that made you feel like he always had a hidden agenda. He showed up 3 months ago, parachuted in by the board, to shake things up after the last CEO retired. He talked fast, threw around buzzwords like confetti, synergy, agility, disruption, and didn't know half of what our clients actually needed. Still, I kept my head down and did my job. I figured if I kept delivering, I'd be safe from any restructuring. That's what Alan kept calling it, restructuring. But then the whispers started, about budget cuts, about new hires that made no sense, and then about a certain someone being brought in from out of town, a cousin of one of the owners. No one said it directly, but I could feel the writing creeping onto the wall, word by word. The moment that really changed everything came on a rainy Thursday. I was working late as usual. Most of the staff had gone home. That's when Alan walked into my office with that plastic grin of his. "Robert," he said too cheerfully, "how about dinner tomorrow night? My treat, you and me. I think we've got a lot to talk about. Big things on the horizon." It caught me off guard. Alan never invited me to anything. I assumed maybe he was finally ready to value my experience. Maybe I'd misjudged him. I nodded and agreed. He picked a fancy steakhouse in Midtown, one of those places where the tablecloths are so white you feel guilty putting your knife on them. So there I was the next evening, dressed sharp, arriving 5 minutes early. Alan showed up 10 minutes late. He didn't apologize, just waved like we were old buddies. We made small talk over appetizers. He asked about my family, my weekend plans, my opinion on the Knicks. Then came the steak, then came dessert, then came the moment. Then, he leaned in, fake concern plastered on his face. "Robert, listen, man. This is really hard for me to say, and I want you to know I deeply respect what you've done for this company, but we're going in a new direction. Starting next week, your position is being dissolved." I froze. "And," he added quickly, "we've already got someone lined up to take over client strategy. Just someone with a bit more digital edge. He's the cousin of one of our founding partners, real sharp guy. You'll like him. Well, maybe not now, but eventually." I couldn't speak. I felt like someone had knocked the air out of me. All those years, all those nights. Gone. Alan smiled, sipped his wine, and said, "But look, you'll get a great severance. And I thought it'd be better to do this over dinner, like men." I looked at him across the table and managed a tight nod. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. But something dark and cold settled in my chest at that moment. A kind of quiet fire. Because what Alan didn't know, what none of them realized, was that I'd been planning to retire in 2 years anyway. And I had spent those years quietly building something on the side, something they should have paid attention to. I paid for my own dinner, shook his hand, and walked out of that restaurant with a calm look on my face. But inside, I was already planning my revenge. They had no idea what I owned. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wore a suit to the office. That was the day everything started to unravel at Bexley Rowe, and it was all about to begin with the cousin they replaced me with. But I'll never forget the look on his face when I walked in through the boardroom doors uninvited. The next morning, I got up at 5 a.m. sharp like I used to when I was first starting my career. I pressed my best gray suit, polished my shoes, and tied my old navy blue power tie. It had been years since I wore it, but this moment called for it. As I stood in front of the mirror, I saw not a defeated man, but a storm brewing in human form. I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. I wasn't going to sit back and watch my legacy get wiped off the map by some smug CEO and a clueless cousin with a fancy MBA. I had something they didn't: time, experience, and ownership. What Alan and the owner's cousin didn't know was this. Years ago, I had helped one of the co-founders, Mr. Rowe, through a nasty legal battle involving the company's intellectual property. At the time, they couldn't afford to pay me for my help, so he offered me 3% equity in the company instead. It wasn't in my contract. It wasn't something people in the office ever talked about, but it was legally binding, and I had the papers to prove it. I'd kept it quiet, tucked away in a folder in my safe at home. Honestly, I forgot about it for a while, until now. So that morning, I took a ride downtown to visit my lawyer, Harold. He'd been my attorney and friend for over 2 decades. "Robert, if this is real," he said, flipping through the documents with growing excitement, "you still own 3% of the company. That gives you voting rights. You're a shareholder. Technically, they can't even fire you without board approval." I smiled. "Yeah, I figured as much. Are you going to sue them?" "Oh no," I said, leaning back in the chair. "I'm going to embarrass them." He laughed, but I didn't. I showed up to the office around 9:15 a.m., walking straight through the glass doors like I owned the place, because technically I did. People stared. Whispers followed me down the hallway. A few interns stood and clapped before being hushed by their supervisors. I walked right past reception and made a beeline for the boardroom. Alan was already inside, talking loudly and laughing with some partners and his new hire, the so-called digital genius, a 27-year-old named Caleb. Caleb was tall, smug, and wearing a hoodie under a blazer. Classic tech bro energy. The moment I opened the boardroom door, the laughter died down. Alan blinked. "Robert, I thought last night was a dinner," I said calmly. "This is business." I placed a leather folder on the table. "This is my equity agreement. I own 3% of Bexley Rowe. I'd like to review a few decisions that were made without shareholder consultation." One of the senior board members, Marcia, adjusted her glasses and opened the folder. Her eyes widened. This looks valid. "Robert, how long have you had this?" "Over 15 years. I helped the company when it was on the edge of collapse. I kept quiet because I believed in the people here." Alan looked like he'd seen a ghost. You can't just barge in and—" "I absolutely can," I said, voice steady. "As a stakeholder, I have full access to review company leadership decisions, including staffing changes." That shut him up. Marcia looked at Alan. "Why weren't we informed of this termination? Or the new hire?" Alan stammered. I thought we had the authority." "You thought wrong," I interrupted. "And now, since the board wasn't consulted, and I wasn't notified through proper legal channels, that termination is invalid." I paused, letting that sink in. Caleb leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Look, man, no offense, but the company needs someone who understands today's market. People like me are the future." I looked him dead in the eye. "That's funny, because I've been running a side agency for the past 5 years. It's called Ravenworks Strategies. Quietly picked up contracts from 3 of our top clients. You ever heard of Maxcom, Grady Motors, Nova Farm?" Caleb's smirk faded. "Wait," Alan muttered. "Those clients dropped us last year." "No," I said. "They dropped you. They've been with me ever since." You could have heard a pin drop. "And as of this morning," I continued, "Ravenworks just signed an exclusive deal with Horizon Retail Group. You were trying to pitch them next month, weren't you?" Alan's mouth fell open. Now that the board had the documents, and I had their attention, I excused myself politely. "I'll give you all a moment to read. When you're done, I'll be in the lounge." I walked out, head high, heart pounding. The shock wasn't over, but I needed the next blow to hit even harder. Less than 30 minutes later, Marcia called me back in. "We've reviewed the documents. You're correct. You retain shareholder rights. We're halting all staffing changes pending an emergency vote." Alan tried to protest, but the board wasn't hearing it. I didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I showed up like a quiet storm. I started reviewing project files, talking to department heads, and making subtle but critical observations. I exposed how Alan had quietly funneled contract work to his college roommate's startup, overcharging us by nearly 40%. I exposed Caleb's padded resume and how he never actually ran a campaign alone. People started whispering again, only this time, it wasn't behind my back. And then came the next blow, unexpected, loud, and humiliating. It all happened during our quarterly all-staff meeting in the main auditorium, with over 200 employees seated. Alan got on stage to give his usual flashy speech. But halfway through, the projector behind him blinked to black, and then began showing numbers, contracts, emails, screenshots, all detailing his backdoor deals, Caleb's resume lies, and the clients we lost under their leadership. A low hum spread through the room. Alan froze. Caleb looked like he wanted to crawl under a chair. Then Marcia stood up in the crowd. This information was brought to our attention by Mr. Robert Gaines. The board has initiated a full investigation. Effective immediately, Alan Bennett and Caleb Foreman are suspended from all duties. The room erupted, and I just sat there in the third row, arms folded, watching the empire I helped build protect itself at last. But that wasn't the end. Because later that week I received an invitation to an emergency shareholder meeting. What happened at that meeting would change the entire future of Bexley Row, and none of them saw it coming. The emergency shareholder meeting was scheduled for a Friday morning, 8 a.m. sharp. The board didn't want to wait. Too much damage had already been done under Alan's brief but disastrous reign. And truth be told, they were embarrassed. A 60-year-old man they'd nearly erased had just saved their company from imploding under flashy leadership and bad judgment. I arrived early and took my seat quietly, letting the tension thicken in the air. The room was packed. Executives, department heads, legal reps, even a few top clients who had been invited to observe. No one said much, but eyes kept flicking in my direction. Alan sat stiffly across the table, pale and clearly shaken. Caleb was nowhere in sight. Word around the office was that he'd taken a personal leave, most likely hiding from the fallout. The meeting began with the chairman of the board, Marcia, slamming the gavel on the polished oak. "Let's get straight to it," she said firmly. "The floor is now open for motions regarding company leadership. Mr. Gaines, as the stakeholder who requested this meeting, you may begin." I stood up slowly, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked to the front. "I won't waste your time," I began. "I dedicated over 2 decades of my life to Bexley Row, not for the money or the prestige, but because I believed in this place. I believed in its people. But what I've witnessed in just the past few months has been deeply disappointing. We were nearly sold out from within. Our reputation, our clients, our trust, all nearly gone for good." I turned to Alan. This man didn't just disrespect me, he disrespected all of us. He didn't understand our values, our work ethic, or our long-standing client relationships. Instead, he brought in a relative of the company's owner who couldn't even run a proper digital campaign. He padded the books, rerouted contracts, and tanked 3 client accounts. Alan started to speak, but Marcia held up her hand. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "do you have a formal motion?" I nodded. "Yes, I do. I move for a no-confidence vote in Alan Bennett's leadership as CEO of Bexley Row, and for immediate termination of his contract." Gasps filled the room. Alan's face went red. "I also move," I continued, "that this company create a new position, Director of Strategic Partnerships, and that the board consider me for that role, not as a step backward, but as a step forward. I'm not asking to return to my old job. I'm offering to help stabilize this company and lead us into a more honest and sustainable future. Silence followed. Then Marcia nodded solemnly. All shareholders eligible to vote, please raise your hand. Hands went up one by one. I counted silently. When they finished, it was clear. The majority had voted in favor of removing Alan. He was done. Alan stood, shaking. "You people are making a mistake," he growled. "You'll regret this." But no one stopped him when he stormed out. No one said a word. Then Marcia turned to me again. "Mr. Gaines, your motion to establish a new leadership role is accepted for consideration. We'll vote on it next week. In the meantime, we request that you assist in the transition." I nodded. Of course. My only interest is the health of this company. As the room emptied, several employees came to shake my hand. Some smiled, others just looked relieved. It felt good. Not because I won, but because the company finally saw what mattered: loyalty, experience, and integrity over flash and favors. But the next day, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. While cleaning out an old filing cabinet in my home office, I came across a thumb drive I hadn't touched in years. One I used to keep personal backups on when I was still with the company full-time. Curious, I plugged it into my laptop. What I found changed everything. Buried in a folder labeled Old Projects were client campaign files, performance metrics, and a set of emails I had forgotten about. Emails from 5 years ago, between Alan and a former investor. The subject lines read, "How to undermine Rowe without triggering alarm. Transition plan, exit Robert quietly. Caleb as backup install, owner's family." My heart dropped. This wasn't just poor leadership. This was planned. Alan had been positioning himself for years, long before he became CEO. He'd been scheming with outside investors, planning to quietly take over and get rid of anyone who knew the company's history, including me. But why? Then I saw it. A memo attached to one email. Private Equity Acquisition Proposal, Bexley Rowe. It was dated 4 months before Alan was hired. They were going to sell the company, strip it, flip it, cash out. Alan's CEO position was never about growth. It was about grooming the company for a fast sale. And if I hadn't stepped in, everything I helped build, every relationship, every employee, every client, would have been gone. Now I had the smoking gun. It was time to burn what little was left of Alan's reputation and go after the investors backing his plan. Because they didn't realize one very important thing. I wasn't just some old man trying to save his job. I was about to save the entire company and make sure they regretted ever trying to erase me. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from a deep, boiling rage that had been building ever since that smug dinner with Alan. I had known he was shady. I had known something wasn't right. But I didn't realize the full extent of it until now. This wasn't just about a job. This was about betrayal, corruption, greed, and I had proof. I immediately made 3 encrypted copies of the thumb drive. One I uploaded to a cloud drive under a new account. Another, I put on a secure USB, locked in my home safe. The third I handed to my attorney, Harold, first thing the next morning. "I need this information to be protected, Harold," I told him. "We're not just talking about Alan anymore. This is bigger." Harold read the emails carefully. This could blow a lot of things wide open. The investors backing this deal, if they're exposed, they'll come for blood. "Let them," I said calmly. "They wanted to erase me. I'll erase their reputations first." That day, I called Marcia and asked for an urgent private meeting with the board. We met that same evening in a secured Zoom call. I laid out the evidence. One email after another. Memos, timelines, call logs, proposals. Everything Alan had done. Everything the outside investors were planning. Names, dates, files. The private equity group behind it all was called Halston Ridge Capital, known for buying up companies, gutting them, and selling off the pieces for profit. Bexley Rowe was just next on their hit list. The board was stunned. A few of them turned pale. "Robert, if this is true," Marcia said slowly, "they were planning to dissolve our departments, offshore our creative work, and push out the legacy team, including the original co-founders. They were going to destroy everything you built," I said. "Everything we built." Another board member, Linda, whispered, "They were going to sell us for parts." "Yes," I said, "and they were going to use Alan and Caleb as pawns to do it." Silence fell over the room. Then Marcia spoke again. "I'll call an emergency board vote, but this will go public if we're not careful." I nodded. "It has to. Carefully but fully. We need to go to the press. On our terms." The board agreed. A legal team was assembled. Within 72 hours, Bexley Rowe's leadership filed an official internal ethics complaint, launched a formal investigation, and issued a cease and desist letter to Halston Ridge Capital for unauthorized interference. Then came the media storm. The press got wind of it faster than I expected. Business journals, tech sites, even national news outlets began covering the story. Veteran executive saves company from silent takeover. Private equity firm accused of backdoor acquisition plot. Former CEO caught in insider collusion scandal. Alan. He was cooked. His name was everywhere, tied to the scandal. Caleb deleted his LinkedIn profile and vanished from social media. Halston Ridge tried to deny involvement, but the paper trail was too clear. Their investors began pulling out. Their next acquisition deal collapsed. Within weeks, they were under federal investigation. But that wasn't the sweetest part. 3 weeks later, I was officially appointed Director of Strategic Partnerships, unanimously voted in by the board. It wasn't just a title. It was a key to the future of the company. I got to rebuild our client base, stabilize the culture, and help guide the hiring of honest, talented professionals, not family members of rich founders. One afternoon, while reviewing new partnership proposals, Marcia walked into my office with a grin. "Robert, there's someone here to see you." I looked up. It was Mr. Rowe, the original co-founder, now retired and rarely seen in public. He walked in slowly, gray beard, cane in one hand, the other extended toward me. "I heard what you did," he said, voice rough but warm. "You saved our company, son. I always knew you had the heart of a lion." I stood up and shook his hand, my throat tight. "You gave me a chance, sir," I said. "I wasn't going to let someone else burn it all down." He smiled. "You know that equity deal we made? I always figured it would come in handy for you someday." We both laughed. Later that week, I was invited to speak at an industry event. I told the story, not just the scandal, but the bigger lesson. "I've learned something in these past few months," I said from the podium. "Experience isn't flashy. Loyalty doesn't trend on Twitter, but they matter. They build legacies. And if you protect those values, they'll protect you back when the storm hits." The crowd stood and clapped. But before I stepped off that stage, I looked out into the audience and spotted someone in the back row. It was Alan, wearing a cheap suit, no press badge, no company logo on his name tag. He stood frozen as I met his eyes. I didn't smile, I didn't nod, I just turned away and walked off stage. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better, and letting the people who tried to destroy you live with the fact that they failed. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, drop your thoughts in the comment section, and subscribe to the channel for more jaw-dropping revenge stories like this one. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.